Hi everyone. So we're now going to get into integer subtraction. This is by far the hardest thing to do with integers. So to subtract, we have one rule that we need to follow. Add the opposite of the number being subtracted. Sounds easy enough, it gets very confusing. But I do want to point out this little key here, that when we subtract a positive, it's the same thing as adding a negative. And when we subtract a negative, it's essentially the same thing as adding a positive. So if we keep that in mind, hopefully we'll be okay. So if we look at our first example, 3 minus 7. Well, again, our first rule or our only step tells us to add the opposite of a number. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to rewrite this equation completely. So instead of 3 minus 7, we said that when we subtract a positive, it's like adding a negative. I'm now going to make this new expression, and instead of the subtract, I'm going to put add and a negative 7. A lot of times people have the saying, when we're subtracting integers, we change the sign and what's behind. So we changed our subtraction to an addition, and we changed the positive 7 to a negative 7. Again, going back to remembering that when we are subtracting a positive, it's like adding a negative. So we just added the negative. Now that we have our rewritten expression, we can go ahead and just follow our addition rules. These are different signs, and we know when they're different signs, we have to subtract them. So 7 minus 3 is 4, and then we're going to take the sign of the larger absolute value. That larger one is going to be the negative 7. Therefore, our answer is going to be negative 4. So we'll look next at example 2. So on our example 2, we have 2 minus 6. Again, we add the opposite of the number being subtracted, or we change the sign and what's behind. So I'm going to change the sign and what's behind. So it was a positive 6, now it's a negative. Or if I just want to rewrite this as an addition, it was 2. Then we're going to add the opposite of the number being subtracted. So what was being subtracted was 6. The opposite of 6 is negative 6. So if we go ahead and look at this one, 2 plus negative 6, we have different signs. We know that when they're different, we have to subtract them. So 6 minus 2 is 4. Then we're going to take the larger absolute value, which is going to be the negative 6. Okay, let's look at our third example. Again, we're going to change the sign and what's behind. So this one's going to be a little bit trickier. If we change the sign here and we change what's behind, that negative is now going to be a positive. When we rewrite this, remember, we said that subtracting a negative was the same thing as adding a positive. So we were subtracting that negative 9, so now we're adding a positive 9. So this just becomes 4 plus 9. Nice and simple. They have the same sign, so we can just go ahead and add those, and we know it's going to be a positive 13. Sometimes people look at this and they say whenever we have two negatives, it becomes a big plus sign. I'm going to write in one more color over here. It becomes a big plus sign right here. And then we see that, or two negatives make a positive. So there's multiple ways we can see this. I'm going to try and stay pretty true to what we have here though. All right, our example 4. Now we're getting into decimals. We're still going to follow the same procedure here. We have negative 4 minus a negative 3.6. So we were told earlier in our little box, subtracting a negative is the same as adding a positive. And we have to add the opposite of a number. So I can change the sign and what's behind, or I can remember that this is just going to be a negative 4.2, and then I'm going to add the opposite of a negative 3.6 is a positive 3.6. So we've written the same thing. Next, we can go ahead and remember our addition integer rules. We have different signs here, so we know we're going to have to subtract those two. When we do, we get a 0.6. A 0.6, excuse me. And then we look at the sign to see which one is bigger for the absolute value, and that's going to be that negative 4.2. So therefore, we're going to have a negative 0.6 for our answer. And you know, if we have decimals here on example 4, then we're going to have fractions on example 5. Yay! All right, so again, we're going to go ahead and follow our rule for integer subtraction. We have to add the opposite of a number, or subtracting a negative is the same as adding a positive. So I'm going to change my sign and what's behind. And I'm going to rewrite this as an adding the opposite. So it was a negative 1/2. We add the opposite of a negative 3/4 is a positive 3/4. And again, because this is fractions, we have to remember that before we do any kind of addition with integers, we have to remember to have that common denominator. Hopefully we realize the common denominator between 2 and 4 is 4. So I'm going to make both of these 4. 2 times 2 is 4. 1 times 2 is 2. I'm going to put that negative sign right back. The 3/4 was already a 4, so it stays the same. So now I can go ahead and add those two fractions. Negative 2 plus 2/4 plus 3/4. Again, they're different signs, so we subtract. 3 minus 2 is 1 over 4. Our larger absolute value of the 2 was the positive, so it's going to end up being a positive 1/4. Now it's your turn. So why don't you try these 4, take a moment to write them down, and then pause, solve them, and then check to see how you did. Are these the answers that you got? Hopefully, we feel comfortable with subtracting integers. And again, on number 4, we can either have the 3 halves or rewrite that as a mixed number as 1 and 1/2.